Earlier we talked a little bit about the presumptive conditions that have been added through the PACT Act, but the fact is that not every claim for a presumptive condition succeeds. What do you see as the biggest stumbling blocks for veterans who are trying to proceed with a presumptive claim but still end up denied?
Well, it's usually one of two things. For some folks, it's the classic record snafu. They can't show they were there.
Oh my goodness.
The records just are missing or were never transcribed in the first place, and we see it from Vietnam all the way forward.
Welcome to the Victory Over VA podcast, a podcast about empowering veterans to overcome denied disability claims. Each week, we deliver critical insights to help you understand the disability process, veterans' benefits, and how to take control of your legal rights. Now here's your host, Tony Francis Jackson.
So today, we're going to talk about questions about the PACT Act.
Yes, welcome to Victory Over VA. If you're a veteran struggling with the VA's disability system, or just want to make sure you're getting the benefits you've earned, you're in the right place. Don't forget to hit subscribe so you never miss an update that could change your life. I'm Kristian Terison, here with renowned veterans disability attorney Francis Jackson of Jackson and MacNichol. Jack has dedicated his career to helping veterans like you win the benefits you deserve, recovering millions of dollars for thousands of heroes. This podcast isn't just for veterans navigating the system, though. It's for their families, their friends, and anyone else who wants to stand shoulder to shoulder with those who've served. So stick around, because we're here to make sure you get the support you need.
So today, we're going to talk about the PACT Act.
Indeed. Specifically, the possibility or what the PACT Act means for veterans now in 2026, years after its initial passage. So, of course, it was signed in 2022, touted as the biggest expansion of VA benefits. Why are we still talking about the PACT Act?
Well, we're still talking about it for several reasons, but probably the biggest reason is that the VA's own statistics suggest that there are more than 1 million veterans who are eligible for benefits under the PACT Act who have not yet filed.
Okay. So if you can give me a sort of the 30-second version of what is the PACT Act for, a veteran who's somehow never come across it.
Okay. So the PACT Act is all about expanding benefits and health care for people with various kinds of exposures, primarily radiation exposures in the 50s, Agent Orange exposures for folks in the 70s, exposure to burn pits in the Middle East. Those are kind of the big categories.
Okay. By the VA's own reporting, they've processed hundreds of thousands of PACT Act claims at this point, but I guess there are still a number of veterans who haven't filed, who might be eligible. What do you see as some of the biggest obstacles?
Well, I think there are two obstacles, and they're really the same two that affect veterans generally. One is there are a group of people who, despite the outrage, simply don't understand that they might be eligible. That's one group. There's a second group that I don't know exactly how best to describe, but essentially they're people who, for whatever reasons, feel that their claims are not the kind of claim they should be making to the VA. And we've talked about this in other episodes, but there are a certain percentage of veterans who, even though the Veterans Disability Compensation System is intended to address all the ways that military service adversely affected people, still feel that they should only make a claim if it's a combat injury with a gunshot wound or a shrapnel fragment or something like that. And so those are kind of the two largest groups that I see that have not filed who are eligible to file under the PACT Act.
The list of presumptive conditions under the PACT Act has continued to evolve since 2022.
Yep.
For anybody watching who doesn't know what a presumptive condition is and wants detail on that, we have other episodes on what all of that entails. But if you could talk a little bit about what has changed in terms of presumptive conditions and what veterans should be aware of for presumptive conditions in the PACT Act.
Well, the biggest thing to be aware of is that what the presence of a presumptive condition does is to replace the requirement that a veteran prove the medical nexus between service and the current condition. So one group, for example, that is now presumptive that was not presumptive before are folks who were exposed to Agent Orange in Thailand. And what this does is, if you were at a Royal Air Force base in Thailand during the Vietnam War, there is now a presumption that you were exposed to Agent Orange. What that means is, if you have lung cancer or diabetes or any one of a host of other conditions, you only have to prove that you were in Thailand and that you have the condition. Now, normally you have to prove that you were in the service, in this case in Thailand, that you have the condition, and that there's a medical connection between your service and the condition. What the presumption does is to take away that requirement of medical nexus and simply presume or assume that connection exists in your case.
So, in the PACT Act expanded a lot of VA healthcare access in addition to the disability compensation. Though, there are many veterans who might have enrolled in the VA healthcare side who've never filed a disability claim. What are they missing, potentially?
Well, they're missing tax-free benefits. I mean, that's what they're missing. It is a good thing that healthcare for veterans has been expanded. I mean, any way you look at that, that's a good thing. There are lots of people who could not afford healthcare who are now getting high-quality healthcare, and that's a plus for the nation. But most of the people who are getting healthcare under the PACT Act are also eligible for some level of disability benefits under the PACT Act. Now, I say most because that's not universally true. There are people who are getting healthcare under the PACT Act and are perfectly healthy and have absolutely no service-connected health conditions, presumptive or otherwise. But for many people, it is rare for older male veterans of Vietnam, for example, not to have hypertension, not to have diabetes, not to have some of the cancers. It is rare for Gulf War veterans not to have some respiratory problems, not to have some sinusitis or allergy or rhinitis problems. And that's not to say there aren't people like that, and bless them, we want everybody to be healthy, but most of these folks who had these kinds of exposures have some level of symptoms. Some have lower levels of symptoms, some have, unfortunately, egregious levels of symptoms, but most of the people who are eligible for the health care are also eligible for veterans benefits, disability benefits specifically, even if they haven't applied, and that's the group we're talking about.
Okay. There are also, anecdotally, veterans who had applied in the early days of the PACT Act going into effect and, might have been incorrectly denied by the VA under the old rules or prior to the PACT Act. Are the doors closed for those veterans, or do they have recourse?
No, they have recourse. Those folks can reapply. One of the truly, truly wonderful things about America's Veterans Benefits System is that the door to application is almost never closed. It is almost always possible, even if previously denied, to come back and start a new claim and explain why you're entitled to benefits and win that claim. There are some exceptions, but they're actually surprisingly small and surprisingly narrow. Almost anyone can reopen a previously denied claim.
Earlier we talked a little bit about the presumptive conditions that have been added through the PACT Act, but the fact is that not every claim for a presumptive condition succeeds. What do you see as the the biggest stumbling blocks for veterans who are trying to proceed with a presumptive claim but still end up denied?
Well, it's usually one of two things. For some folks, it's the classic record snafu. They can't show they were there.
Oh my goodness.
The records just are missing or were never transcribed in the first place. And we see it from Vietnam all the way forward. There are folks who were in these various theaters whose records were never updated to show that they were temporarily stationed there. And, these TDY, temporary duty orders, it seems like many of them never got saved to permanent records. We've had numerous people who say, oh, I was on TDY to so-and-so, and you go to their records and there's no evidence of that. That doesn't mean they weren't. In fact, most of the time they were, and ultimately we can figure out a way to prove that, but that's one problem. The second problem is a mismatch of diagnosis. Presumptive conditions are very specific conditions. And so if your condition gets described a little differently than the way the presumptive condition is defined, the VA may not make the connection that it's actually within the scope of the condition that has been defined as presumptive. So you sometimes have to get some medical explanation or medical documentation or expert opinions to show that, A is really the same as B, even though they've gotten different labels. And one of the problems that just continues to bedevil the Gulf War veterans is a Gulf War presumption for what VA lawyers like to call a MUCME, a medically explained chronic multi-symptom illness. You can see why it gets abbreviated to a MUCME. Anyway, it's a catch-22. As soon as your doctor puts a label on it, it's no longer undiagnosed. And so you go around this circle where VA says, oh, you don't have an undiagnosed condition, and your doctor says, oh, clearly this guy's got Gulf War syndrome, and it goes around that circle and around that circle. Usually with a detailed medical report, you can eventually break out of that circle, but I've seen veterans who, before they came to us, went around that loop multiple times, and they clearly qualified. It's just the way everything was phrased didn't match up with the way VA wants it laid out, and so they got denied. And it's just, but those are the big problems that I see.
Gotcha. Earlier you had mentioned about TDY orders, things like that. What is the recourse, or what do you do when you have a lack of documentary evidence to establish that a veteran was in one of the places where a presumption applies?
Well, usually you can work around it one of two ways. Sometimes you can get kind of peripheral records. One of the things we've had success with in several cases is getting, for example, with the Army morning reports or with the Navy deck logs that showed that Jones wasn't at his stateside assignment or his assignment in Germany or whatever, which showed that there was support for Mr. Jones' statement that in fact he was on TDY to, Kuwait or Vietnam or wherever it was. Another thing that we've had some success with is buddy statements, getting statements from folks who served alongside saying, hey, I was stationed in Jacksonville, Florida, and they sent Jones on a special mission to Vietnam with the Hawk missile batteries, and he was gone for 3 months, and then he came back with a tan. We can use that sort of thing. And of course, this is more challenging, but we've had some success with people who have sent letters home that were saved by relatives, and the letter would say, I can't tell you all the details, but I'm in Laos, or I can't tell you all the details, but I'm in Kuwait, or whatever, with the original envelope with the date stamp back to the war period. There are different ways to get at it, but usually there is some way you can establish the person was in fact there.
One of the interesting things about the PACT Act is that it requires the VA to sort of conduct these ongoing scientific reviews of the presumptive conditions and add new conditions as the science supports it. Are you aware of any conditions that are currently under consideration for presumption?
Well, as you know, the last big one was hypertension. You know, the first Trump administration refused to make that a presumptive condition. It is now presumptive, but the ones that are kind of on the borderline of becoming presumptive, I guess is the best way to put it, are some rare cancers. One of the things that the PACT Act did was to include another group of cancers in the Agent Orange exposure, for example. And the reason that you get these very slow movements toward presumption status is that these are rare cancers, which means that there's not enough volume of cases to show that there's a substantially higher proportion of the cancer being incurred in the body of veterans. I mean, if you only have 100 cases of this cancer in the whole country, it's very hard to make the case that there's a higher proportion among veterans, even if there are a few more than random statistics would suggest. It's a statistical problem. You don't have a big enough basis. That's where the ones I'm seeing at the moment land. You know, there are some cancers that look like they might be presumptive, but there's just not enough basis for anybody to make a final call.
One way or the other, sure. We're almost out of time for today, but I just wanted to ask, for a veteran who, qualifies under the PACT Act for disability benefits compensation, how can that be the starting point for a broader review of what benefits might be possible or that they might be eligible for?
Sure. Well, we did a podcast a bit ago about tinnitus being kind of an entree to the veterans benefits world, and it's the same thing with these PACT Act cases. What happens is once you kind of move into the VA compensation benefits world, one of the things that will happen is that the VA is going to kind of look at your whole history and picture, and in many cases that will lead to recognizing that there are other conditions that may be connected to service either presumptively or secondarily or as a complication of the original condition or as something stemming from the medication that was taken for the original condition, or is in some other way related to service. I mean, there are so many possible avenues that it's difficult to catalog them all. But the point is that once you get into the system, the VA, in all fairness, does make a real effort to look at everything that's going on with a veteran who's in the disability compensation claims system and try to figure out whether there are conditions that should be service-connected that are not yet service-connected.
All right. Well, that is our episode for today. Thank you for joining us on Victory Over the VA. Please be sure to like and subscribe and join us again next week.
We really hope to see you then.
Thanks for joining us this week on the Victory Over VA podcast. Make sure to visit our website, veteransbenefits.com/podcast, where you can subscribe to the show in iTunes, Spotify, or via RSS, so you'll never miss a show. While you're at it, if you found value in this show, we'd appreciate a rating on iTunes, or if you'd simply tell a friend about the show, that would help us out too. If you like this show, you might want to check out our free consultation to see how we can help you with your denied claim. Simply go to veteransbenefits.com and fill out the form. You fought for us. Now let us fight for you. And be sure to tune in next week for our next episode.